Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Sage Intacct Year-End Tips and Tricks for Best Practices. We're so excited to have you with us today for our first Sage Intacct Year-End session. We're going to dive into all the details in just one moment, but before we do, I have a couple of those boring housekeeping items to go over. So I just want to make you aware that today's session is being recorded. We're going to send out the recording to everyone who registered, whether you were able to catch the whole session or not, tomorrow afternoon. We'll also be talking about some links throughout the session. I'll make sure to drop those in the chat, but we'll also include them in tomorrow's follow-up email. That said, also everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise to a minimum, but we would love to hear from you, whether that be in the chat or the Q&A section. Either way, we will open it up for Q&A at the end of today's presentation. So if you have any questions, you can get them in at any time in the chat or in the Q&A in the right-hand side of your screen. So I think that covers all the high-level details. You can also keep an eye out. We will be putting out more year-end resources for Sage Intacct in blog form, in video form, and we'll be sending those to your email throughout the end of the year and into the new year. So keep an eye out for additional information on year-end and Sage Intacct and things that you can use to reference throughout your year-end close. So with that said, I am going to bring on today's presenter to introduce himself. Mike, how are you doing?
Good. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever everyone is here. All the greetings. My name's Mike. I've been here at SWK just for a little over a year, but I've been working in Intacct as a consultant for a little over 5. I've got experience in a handful of different types of projects within Intacct. I started off primarily in the nonprofit space. Now I'm more doing construction projects, but I do a little bit of everything here and there. So I do want to get into today's agenda. So first and foremost, we're going to get into the pre-close preparation, meaning key configurations and different items in order to successfully process those 1099s within Sage Intacct. We're then going to get into some bank reconciliation items where we'll cover the new bank transaction assistant import file and briefly discuss how to set up any auto matching rules if you want those in your bank recs. After that, we'll get into certain items with the general ledger, just some best practices to keep things running smoothly as you go. And then we are going to get into the year-end close process for those books and how to officially process those 1099s in Intacct. And finally, we'll wrap up a few housekeeping items just to discuss some best practices to follow after the year's been closed. All right, and with that being said, we can jump right on into our Sage Intacct portion of this. So first and foremost, we're going to start off with the pre-close preparation. These are going to be items that you're going to want to make sure are set up so that you can process your 1099s in Sage Intacct. So there's 2 different things, whether you are single entity or multi-entity. I'm going to show you both briefly here. So the first one is going to be if you're multi-entity. We do want to make sure that you have the ability set up to do your 1099s, from each individual entity. So if you go into the admin portion and go into your subscriptions, you can access your multi-entity setups right here. So down here, I'm going to scroll. I'm going to go into configure. And the second item right here is going to be issue a separate 1099 per entity. So if this is something that you've done in the past, you won't need to do this, right, if you've been in Intacct for a couple of years. But you do want to make sure that you have this selected if you have the need to, issue those 1099s per separate entity there. So once you have that selected, you'd hit the save button and you're good to go on that front. Now, the next thing we're going to need is to have those entities set up with their federal IDs as well as a legal contact. So if you go into the setup portion of your company module, you go into the entities themselves here, whether you've got 2 entities, 3 entities, however many we're going to be filing 1099s for. We're going to want to hit that edit button, and we're going to want to confirm that there is a federal ID and a legal contact. So you can see in this case, the federal ID is going to be right here towards the top. We got to make sure that's filled in. And then down here, about midway on the page, you have a legal contact. So you can see right here, there's an option to enable legal name and address on the 1099 forms. Once you hit that checkbox, you can fill in the legal name, the address, city, state, whatever other information you might need in there. Now that's going to be for multi-entity only. If you are going to be doing single entity or you don't need to issue them from a separate 1099, you can go into your company setup, go into company here, and you will have the ability to add in your federal ID as well as a legal address on the company info itself there. Okay. So that's going to be some of the general configurations. Now we're going to get into the accounts payable side of things. There are a couple of configurations that we're going to want to make sure are taken care of over there. The first one's going to be if you go into the accounts payable setup and then configuration. About midway down the page, you're going to have the options for your 1099 tags. Now, there's three options here. The e-filing powered by Tax Bandits, we're going to talk about a little bit later on in today's call. But for now, we just want to make sure that, if we are going to be utilizing 1099s, we have this flag override selected as well as the form and box override. So what happens in Sage Intacct is if a vendor is tagged for 1099, anytime you create a bill for them, it's going to automatically select 1099. But these buttons will allow you to either deselect it, override the forms that we're applying to, right? So these could come in handy as you process those 1099s. Once you have those two things selected, you can hit that save button and the configuration will save. From there, we need to make sure that the vendors are set up for 1099. So we're going to go into our vendors list here. Now, one of the things you'll notice is I do have a custom view set up so that I can see my vendors that are and aren't 1099. So if you don't have a custom view set up, this is typically what you're going to see. You're going to have the ID, the name, the address information for these vendors. And there's not, from this view at least, there's not necessarily a quick way to confirm which vendors do and don't have 1099 information associated. So what I've done is if you go into the top left here, manage views, you can create a new view. Now I already have mine saved, so I'm just going to briefly go over this. But essentially what this is going to do is this will allow you to update what columns you're going to see on your vendor list. And you can see here you do have the option to select Form 1099 type as well as Form 1099 box. So we'd want to make sure we select those. Once we have those selected, you would just go through the remainder of this process, right? You can decide what order the columns are going to show in. You can save it, give it a name. But once it's created there and you hit save, it's going to create this 1099 view for you, which you can get to in the top left, the all dropdown. And that is how you get to add in the 1099 information natively on here. And if you want to sort and just see your 1099 vendors, you can either add a filter or you can click Form 1099 type here, and it's going to refresh your page and you can see all of your 1099 vendors at the top. So that's a quick and easy way to validate which vendors do and don't have it. Of course, you can export this into Excel as well if you need to. And if you need to edit these in any way, right? So any of them that already have it, if you hit the edit button on the vendor, and then you go into the additional information tab, the 1099 is going to show up here, right? So you've got Form 1099. You can see this one is DIV Box 1A. If anything needs to update with this, you can hit Form 1099. And then this is where you'll be able to change what the default name and box is going to be on a vendor that already has 1099s associated with it. Now, if it's a vendor that we're associating for the first time for 1099, we would find one that is blank. So I'll use this Washington State here. I'm going to hit that edit button. And then it's going to be a similar process, right? We're going to go into additional information. We're going to hit Form 1099. And then this is where you can opt to say, all right, this is going to be DIV. The default box will automatically fill and give you any applicable options. And then you'd hit save from here. And that'll go ahead and set this vendor up as 1099 applicable. All right. Now, one of the things that you might need to do, you might need to update a ton of vendors at a time, right? So if you're only doing 4 or 5, it's not a difficult thing to do manually in the system. But if you have a big list, maybe 20 plus vendors that you want to do, I would recommend using an import for this. So as mentioned, there's going to be a couple of steps that we need to do here in order to make this as easy as possible. So what I would first do is export your list into an Excel file so that you get all of your vendor IDs in a single column, right? So when you export it into Excel, it's going to look something like this, where you're going to get just exactly what you have in there. It's going to come out into Excel. The next thing that we're going to need is we're going to want the option, we're going to want to pull the import template, right? So if you hit import in the top right, you can download the specific import template there. Now on the import template, it's going to give you all the different headers when actually importing a new vendor, but you can also use this template to update already existing vendors, right? So what we're going to want to do is any vendors that we're going to update, we're going to populate in the vendor ID column. You can see I have that highlighted in yellow here. The rest of the columns, if we scroll to the right, Q and R is where the Form 1099 type is and the Form 1099 box is. So that's where you can put DIV, MISC, INT, whatever it is you might need there, right? And essentially what we can do is we can take the 3 columns that are required, and you can either, delete the columns that you don't need, or you can do what I've done and you can just add, you can just manually, populate those onto its own Excel import. So you can see here, all I've done was I've put in vendor 77 as my vendor ID, the Form 1099 type as NEC, and my 1099 box as 1. So all you would need to do at this point, and obviously, I'm only using 1 in this example, but you can do 20, 30, however many vendors you need here. You can save this as a CSV file. And then when you go back into the import template, right, we'd hit import here. You would do, choose your file, drag and drop that in, and any of your vendors that you use with that import file are going to go ahead and update there for you. So that's just a nice way to kind of quickly, mass update for those 1099s. Now, once the vendors are marked as 1099 eligible, you can go into bills and you can confirm it. So one of the things, I know this motor lease vendor is a 1099 vendor. Maybe I want to see, just confirm that everything is working. So if you hit view on the bill itself, you'll notice 2 things on here. 1, 1099 checkbox, that's automatically checked because this is a 1099 vendor. But I can also go into show details, and I can see the 1099 type and the 1099 box that were tagged as a result as well. Now, there are a couple of things in here that I do want to talk about before we move on to the next topic, and that is, if we go into the Import Data tab, there's a couple of different things we can do with the 1099s. So first and foremost, there is an import file. I'm not going to go too far into these, but I do just want to bring these up. So there is an import file. You can take the template here, and essentially what that'll do is you can populate it as of a point in time with any opening 1099 balances. So if you went live in Intacct on July 1st and you have obviously 1099 balances from your legacy system through June 30th, you can use this template to update all of those vendors at that point in time. The other thing you can do is this vendor 1099 transaction update. You can use this to update already existing records in Sage Intacct. So on the same front, let's say we went live on July 1st, but we didn't really activate our 1099s until midway in December. You can use this import file to retroactively update any AP bills between July and December that have occurred for that vendor. So once we have our configuration set up, we have all of our 1099s updated, we can get ready to run the actual 1099 report. So if we go into accounts payable, over here on the right-hand side, you're going to have 1099s where we can view the 1099 report. All right, now just like any of our other reports in Sage Intacct, you've got your start date, end date up top. You've got any individual filters. So in this case scenario, I'm just going to filter to one specific entity here. You can choose which form types we're going to see. I'm just selecting all of them, but you can pick and choose which ones you want to see here. And then when you're ready to pull that 1099 report, you can either export it or you can go ahead and hit that view button. And we don't have too much in this demo environment, as you can see, but for motor leases, we do have 2 items that are 1099 there. All right. So as far as filing the 1099s, we're going to get into that in a little bit here, but I do want to move into the bank reconciliation portion of this. Just housekeeping items before we move into that. It's always best practice to don't wait until the end of the year to run these 1099 reports, right? Run them periodically throughout the year. Make sure that everything is, looking as it should be. Obviously, we're at the end of the year now, so it's more of a 2026 plan that you have there. But definitely something that I would highly recommend. The other thing I would recommend, kind of how we created that view for the taxable vendor or the 1099 vendors. You want to make sure any views, any custom reports, right? We get all of those set up in advance as well. And finally is just purchasing those 1099 forms in advance. So if you're not e-filing through Tax Bandits, chances are you're going to be printing out your 1099s in the system. And if you do need those forms, one of the resources that we're going to provide you with here today, we've got a whole bunch of frequently asked questions and how-tos, but we're also going to give you a link to Sage Intacct does have their website where they have the forms and all of that good stuff there that you can purchase if needed. All right, so that's the basic, initial setup for our 1099s. Now, the next thing I want to get into are the bank recs. And I'm sure many of you that are here already know how to reconcile those banks in Sage Intacct, but there is a newer feature new to this year called the Bank Transaction Assistant, and I wanted to take some time to walk through that. So for starters, the bank transaction import, if you have bank feeds set up in your system, this is not something that you'll necessarily need to worry about because your bank feeds are already doing this. But these import files, what they allow you to do is you can take an Excel file, bring it into Sage Intacct, and we can set up automatic matching rules so that if we have something, a transaction on the bank side that matches a transaction on the Intacct side, we can have Intacct automatically match those two things together. So what we're going to do is this bank transaction import files, we're going to click into this. All right. Now you can see here I have a few tests that I've set up in preparation for today's call. But if we want to get this transaction import going, we're going to hit this add button in the top right-hand corner. From here, you're going to select the bank that we are making this import for. You can see it kind of gives you a brief summary to what's gone on so far. And once you hit the continue button, you're going to get to a page where you can drag and drop from your local device any file that you might be importing for bank transactions. Now you'll notice here plenty of different formats are supported, so chances are whichever one you're using, it should be working here. And there's also a file import guide, right? So if you click into that, it'll tell you, all right, here's some additional information if you have 3 columns or 4 columns or what have you in that scenario. So what you would do from here is you would select the file from your device, and I'll show you real quick what that file could potentially look like. I have a pretty quick one set up, and it is quite literally just, let me zoom in so you can see it here. It's quite literally just 3 lines, a date, a description, and an amount. You don't need the custom Sage Intacct headers, the CSV import or anything like that. This is really all you need in order to update your bank there, right? So what I would do is I would select that file, I would drag and drop it in here. Now, the file that I have is already in the system, so I'm not going to drag and drop that in there. But once you do, review transactions on the bottom right-hand corner is going to pop up. You'll be able to select into that, and then it'll just give you a quick snapshot of what those bank transactions are going to look like before they enter into Sage Intacct. So once you run that, the items are officially going to populate in your bank. And I'll show you, if we go into the bank reconciliation here, and I go into my CO test bank, and I hit continue. Now, if you have bank feeds, this is not going to look new to you. If you do not currently utilize bank feeds or automatic matching rules, this might look newer. So we do have the Intacct tab. That is going to be your payments, your journal entries, everything that's actually happening in the system. The bank is going to be the transactions that we just imported, right? It's not creating journal entries. It's not posting payments. It's not doing anything like that. But what it is doing is it's creating that record in Sage Intacct. So we can say, well, we have a bank amount for $775 on December 8th. If we have that exact same transaction on the Intacct side, we can set up a rule in Sage Intacct that'll automatically match those two things together. So if auto matching and the reconciliations is something you haven't explored before, it can take out a lot of the work. There's still going to be some manual process to the bank recs, but it will potentially cut out a lot of work that you have to do on those reconciliations. Now, setting those up in itself, it's kind of a longer process than it's going to sound like here. So I'm just going to briefly go over, what that looks like in the system. So if you do decide that you want to go with these bank transaction imports and you do decide that you want to roll forward with automatic matching rules, in order to get these set up, you'd go into cash management setup, and then you're going to see matching and creation rules here. Now I have a couple of test ones in here. I'm just going to click into one, but obviously if we're creating a new one, we would just hit that create button. But for this one, I'm just going to take a look at one that we already have. And when you're setting these up, it is fairly straightforward for the most part. The details at the top, you'll tell it, what the ID is, give it a name. You'll also be able to put in any filters. So if you only want this rule to take place in the bank under a certain filter, right? You can set that up in here. You can see I can say the intact transaction, the transaction type has to equal debit or something like that, right? So you can really tie in what you want these filters to be. But the meat and potatoes of this is down at the bottom. This is where the matching conditions are. So this is where we can say, all right, the bank transaction field, if the document number equals the intact document number, that's step one. If the amount equals the amount between the bank and intact, that's step two. And you can even get further into it. We could say the posting date has to be the same, the description has to be the same, right? But this is us telling Intacct, hey, if the document number and the amount are the exact same, you can go ahead and auto match this for us. And when you auto match things, they don't, you still have time to review them. They're not going to automatically completely reconcile, but they will automatically match. So it's just one less thing that you have to worry about during your reconciliation process. All right, so that's our bank rec portion. Now I do want to get into just some housekeeping items on journal entries, things that could potentially be, overlooked along the way. So as a reminder, I know most of you probably know how to do your journal entries in Sage Intacct already, so I'm not going to go through that process, but we do have recurring journal entries in Sage Intacct, which I do find goes underutilized, but can be very useful if you have them. So if you come into recurring journal entries and you hit add, there's going to be two tabs. The first one, pretty straightforward. It's pretty much the exact same thing as what a normal journal entry would be in the system, but you'll notice you also have the schedule tab. Now, if you click into the schedule tab, this is where you can actually set up the schedule for that recurring journal entry. So we can say, all right, well, as of December 11th, that's going to be the start date of this recurring journal entry. You can say, how often is this going to repeat? Maybe I want it to repeat for the next 12 months, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to end it after a certain number of occurrences. I'm going to say 12 occurrences here. And then down here, you can say, is it going to repeat every day, every week, month, years? So in this case, we're going to do months. After you fill that in, you have to tell it how frequently this is going to happen. So I'm going to say every 1 month, and maybe I want it to happen. You can see here there's a checkbox for end of the month. Maybe I want it to be at the end of the month. So what I've done here is I've set up a journal entry that is going to run at the end of every month for the next 12 months. And just like any other journal entries, you can edit it, you can change it, whatever it is you might need to do, as long as it's not in a closed period when you go to do that. You'll also notice you can put an email here. So if you want a notification whenever this posts, you can do that. And you can also set it to automatically reverse as of a certain date as well, if that's something you might need. Now, the next thing I want to note here are just the transaction allocations. So these are more of a use case scenario. Not everyone is going to need to utilize these transaction allocations, but what you can do with these. So first and foremost, if this is something you're interested in and you cannot find it in your environment, chances are it just needs to be configured. So in the general ledger configuration portion, there is a button in here. You can see right here to enable transaction allocation in journal entry. So this is going to allow us to actually create and utilize those transactions that we might potentially set up. But if we go into the actual setup and transaction allocations themselves, so in order to add one, obviously you'd hit the add button, but I'm going to edit one and just show you what we already have set up for this department allocation. So you can see you give it a name, but the main thing is you got to allocate it. And are we doing it by a percentage, a fixed amount, an exact amount, right? In this case scenario, I'm doing it by a percentage, and I'm putting 80% of it to estimating and 20% of it to finance. Now, the location, if you're in a multi-entity environment, you're always going to have to define that because that's going to be a required field. And then you do see, it doesn't stop at department. You have all of your different dimensions that you can allocate across if you need to. So for the purpose of this transaction allocation, again, it's an 80-20 split. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this allocation, and then I'll show you real quick how these actually interact in the system. So whenever you go to do a journal entry, I'm just going to pick an account at random here, and we'll do $1,000 just to keep it nice and level. So you'll notice on the right-hand side, I do have now a box for allocation, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to hit department allocation. You're going to notice two things happen. One, the department and location, I can no longer really select those, right? Because they're grayed out. Anything I do in there is not necessarily going to, take account on this transaction. And the reason being is because if I hit show details, I'm actually going to get my allocation splits, right? So even though everything is staying on one single line here, when you're looking at the journal entry from a high level overview, it does actually know, all right, here's our allocation split. You can go in and customize it in real time if you need to, but you can see here, it automatically took 80% into estimating, and it automatically took 20% into finance there. So like I said, use case scenario, not everyone's going to find a need for those transaction allocations, but they do come in handy, if you could utilize them. Just a couple of things of note while we're talking about our journal entries. So just for good housekeeping here, right? So you always want to make sure if we're doing manual journal entries, and you may have run into this at some point this year if your subledgers have ever been thrown off. You really only want to enter to our manual entries, right? So like a general journal or a payroll journal. We don't want to do too many, if any, entries to the APJ or the ARJ, because all of those are coming from the accounts payable module, the accounts receivable module, cash management, right? Everything that's hitting these journals are happening automatically for us based on the other modules. So I want to show you two things that we can do to help keep our subledger, as clean and tying out as much as possible. The first thing is, if this is an issue you run into, you can actually disallow direct posting on these journals. So the AP journal, for example, if we want to make sure that no one can post manual journal entries to there, we're going to go into the Setup tab of the General Ledger, and we're going to find our journals, and then we can hit Edit on the Accounts Payable journal. You'll notice you'll have this box to disallow direct posting. So what that's going to do is that's just not going to allow anyone to do manual journal entries to the APJ. The only way you can affect this is by going through the transactions directly in the Accounts Payable module. So that's one thing that you can do to help keep your journals clean. Now, if your subledgers are off, most commonly it's because we have manual entries to either the AP or the AR account. So I just want to show you, you can actually disallow direct posting on the individual accounts as well. So if you go into your chart of accounts, and then I'll use the accounts receivable in this example, if you hit Edit on there, you will have the option to disallow direct posting. So now anything that's happening on this AR account, it's only originating in the accounts receivable module, right? I can't actually do manual journal entries to this. So it does go a long way in terms of just keeping things clean in Sage Intacct, making sure our subledgers are good to go. All right. Now, the next thing I want to get into here today is the close process. And I actually do have a video to share with you. It's about 4 minutes long here. I was going to demo it for you in real time, but it takes 10 to 15 minutes. And I figured it's just, best to describe through the 4-minute video there. But before we jump into the video, I do just want to show you if you do not open and close your books every month, or if you're newer in Sage Intacct and it's not something that you've done in the past, if you come into the General Ledger module, you do have the option to open and close your books. You also have that on the individual subledgers. So if I go into Accounts Payable, you can see I can open and close my subledger. If I go into AR, I'm going to see the same thing. But for the sake of this, if I go into the General Ledger, let's say I want to close down my books for this month here. So I can hit Close, And if you're multi-entity, you are going to have to select the entity that you're selecting. And then the second portion is, well, when are we closing this to? So in this case, if I selected this, my books are now going to be closed through the end of March 22, which will block any transactions from occurring. Then all you would do is you hit close books in the top right-hand corner, and that effect will take place. And the same thing on the open side, if we click into that, the screen is going to look identical. You're picking an entity, you're picking the time period that you're doing. The main difference here is you can open individual subledgers when you're opening them, right? So that's something to keep in mind there. But more or less, it is just about the same process there. All right. So the video that I want to show you here, it's one of the newer features for 2025, and it's the Copilot Close Assistant. So if you have your Copilot subscription enabled, then you'll have access to this. If after you watch this video, it's something you're interested in and you don't have access to it, you might just need to reach out to your Intacct representative there to get it going. But I'm going to go ahead and play this video. And Courtney, keep me honest here if the sound doesn't play.
Sage Close Automation is an AI productivity assistant that transforms how you work. It automates complex tasks, offers targeted business insights, and provides proactive recommendations to improve performance. Close Assistant within Close Automation helps you manage and accelerate period closing tasks. Let's use Close Assistant to accelerate this month's close. Access Close Assistant by selecting Copilot. Copilot must be enabled in your instance, and you must have the permissions to use it. For information on enabling Copilot, contact your account representative. From Copilot, you can access all the Close Automation features enabled in your company, including Close Assistant and variance analysis. Start by selecting Run Close Assistant. Next, select the period you're closing. The July period is what's being worked on, so select month ended July. Close Assistant lists the common period closing milestones that have not been completed or marked. You can select any milestone from the list to go directly to that part of Sage Intacct. Before starting to work on the accounts payable items, let's check the status of the bank reconciliation by selecting Review Bank Reconciliation. This shows a predefined list that details which accounts have been reconciled and the reconciliation date. Now let's tackle the items for accounts payable. Start by selecting Review Unposted Bills to review the draft bills and accounts payable. A predefined list shows the bills in July with a status of draft. You can go to the bill from this list. The bill for Costel needs to be posted. Let's edit and post the bill. Notice that Copilot is still open. Copilot stays open as you go to the items, so you can easily access it. When you are working on other things, you can minimize Copilot by selecting the arrow. You can reopen Copilot at any time by selecting the arrow again. With the draft bills reviewed, let's move on to closing AP. Select the Close AP link to start the process of closing the AP subledger. Let's close the AP subledger for July by selecting July as the period. Select Close to close the AP subledger for July. Let's refresh the Accounts Payable section of Close Assistant and see which tasks are still open. This is especially helpful when multiple people are working on different close milestones at the same time. Copilot refreshes that part of the list. Notice that Close AP is no longer marked as to do. The refresh button on each part of the list refreshes just that portion of Close Assistant. Use Regenerate to rerun the Close Assistant. Regenerating the Close Assistant can take time, especially if you have a large number of transactions. Notice that the cash management ledger is now closed. If other people are working on other close milestones, refreshing Close Assistant will show you what has been completed. You can view when your subledgers and general ledger were last closed by selecting View Close Books Overview. Notice that all the subledgers were closed in June, and the AP and cash management subledgers are closed for July. Close Assistant is one way that Sage Intacct helps you simplify and accelerate your close process.
All right. All right, so the next thing I want to get into here is the actual processing of 1099s within Sage Intacct, right? So we went through the prerequisites of the 1099 process at the beginning of our call. So now we're going to get into this. Now, there's two main ways to file your 1099s through Sage Intacct. So the first one is going to be if you are opting to print your 1099s, right? So in order to do that, we'd come into AP, and then down in the bottom left-hand corner here, we're going to have Print 1099 Form. Now, what you're going to do from here is you're going to select the year. If we want to do a specific vendor, so I'll do motor leases here, and then you can also do your entities as well, right? If we are multi-entity, this is going to be an important step for you. And then down at the bottom, you have the formatting. So right now, this one I'm going to print to the div form here. But you can see if you click into that, you can print whichever ones you need to. And then we're going to hit that print button here. Now, it's important to note that if you are printing your 1099s from Sage Intacct, you are going to need the forms, physically ready to go, because what this is going to do, you'll see, is it doesn't actually create the form for you. It just populates the form. So you can see you've got the motor leases, the vendor ID, you've got the year, the amount, right? And that's going to coincide with where the box is on the actual form itself. So that's how the print 1099 is going to work out of Sage Intacct. You just need to make sure that you have that form handy, but the print will do the rest for you. Now, if you want to e-file, so that would go through Tax Bandits. And again, so I'm going to go back and refer to the configuration page, because if that is something that you're going to do, that is a configuration that does need to be turned on. You can see there's a checkbox for filing through Tax Bandits there. Now, what we are going to want to do, though, we're going to provide you with some information on Tax Bandits as part of this call. And essentially, you would need to set up, an account with Tax Bandits. They would kind of get you going there, and they would be the ones to walk you through that. You can see if you click the question mark next to it, it actually does give you a quick link to some of the same files that we're going to be sharing with you, how the 1099 e-filing works with Tax Bandits, any pricings, terms and conditions, so on and so forth. But largely in part, that is going to be a process that Tax Bandits is going to handle there. All right. So that's how we run our 1099s. Now I only have a few things left for you, and then we can open it up to some questions here if anyone has them. And it's just really our post-close, best practices for the year. So just quick reminders here. First and foremost, we're going to want to generate our financial reports, right? So once everything is good to go for 2025, we're going to want to go into our financial reports, preview our balance sheet, preview our P&Ls, make sure everything is looking good there, right? So just best practice, we want to make sure we're pulling those reports. Now, one of the things that you might notice on your reports, if you're primarily using out-of-the-box financial reporting, then the categories on your chart of accounts is going to be what's driving your balance sheet and what's driving your P&L. One of the common things that I've seen is, obviously throughout the year, we might have a handful of new accounts on our chart of accounts. And a lot of times, if you're looking at your balance sheet, you might notice, well, something's off here. Our assets, nothing ties out. It's not balancing, right? Chances are it might be because one or more of our accounts doesn't have a category on it, right? So the first thing that I always do if the balance sheet is off is I go into the chart of accounts. And just like we did with the 1099s, I set up a custom view so that I can see this quick start category. And you'll notice I do actually have two accounts here, the undeposited funds and this postage test account, that do not have a quick start category. Since those are not currently categorized, those might be missing entirely from my out-of-the-box balance sheet, which could obviously throw that off there, right? So just something to keep mind on. Obviously, I wouldn't wait until the end of the year every year to confirm this. You want to make sure that you are confirming this whenever those new accounts are created. But this is going to be a very common reason as to why your balance sheet might be off at the end of the year. So just make sure you're double checking the quick start categories for each of those. The next thing that I want to briefly mention, so if you're using standard reporting periods in the system, this might not, really pertain to you too much. But if you have custom reporting periods, you are going to want to create those reporting periods for the upcoming 2026. And how you can do that is going into Reports, Setup, and on the right-hand side here, you are going to have Reporting Periods. Now, this is going to show me all of my out-of-the-box reporting periods, as well as any other reporting periods that have been set up. But these are nice and easy to do. So all you would do is you would hit Add in the top right-hand corner. You would give it a name. So we'll call it, month ended December 2025. You can make the column header the same or different, whatever you might need to do there. And then the start date and end date is just going to say, all right, well, it's 12/1 through 12/31 of 2025. And then you can also toggle it to be used for budgeting. So when you're building out those 2026 budgets, if you want to make sure you can use these custom reporting periods, you do need to make sure you are having that button toggled there. But that's all you really need to do, right? So we give it a name, we tell it the start and end date, we would hit save there. I'm going to hit cancel just because I already have this one. But you can see once it saves, you've got it there. You've got your start date, your end date, and now you can use this on both reporting and budgets. Okay. Now, speaking of budgets, I know those 2026 budgets are coming up here. So in the general ledger module, that is where you can find your budgets repository. Now, for the sake of this, I'm not going to go into the full-on budgets process because that could be a whole call in itself. But we are going to provide, some documentation on how to update your budgeting with those Excel spreadsheets. But just as a quick example, your budgets repository is going to live here. This is where you can, manually add budgets. You can do the import. You can see if you click into the import, you can, quickly download the template there. So just some things to think about if this is going to be something you're looking to do for 2026. Now, the last two things that I have for you here today, just some admin housekeeping really on these last two. And the first one is going to be to make sure you're reviewing your users and your permissions, right? So first and foremost, for the users, I know everyone's got, a certain amount of business users versus employee users. You always want to make sure that we, have our list is nice and updated. We only have as many users as we need there. But you also want to make sure that the roles are updated. So even if your roles are all set up already, there are some things that could change whenever new releases come out. So for example, if I read the release 4 release notes, right? So I can click read release notes here. There's going to be subsections for everything. And a lot of times, or at least on a handful of the releases, it's not going to be on every single one of them, but sometimes there are permission changes. So if you click into company administration, you can see permission changes. And it'll give you a brief overview to what's been updated, added, or removed. So if any of these, existed on any of your roles and you think they might be, either negatively impacting them or maybe we just need to add, something new to those roles, definitely something worth doing at the end of the year just to, keep track of everything. And the very last thing is going to be your attachment folders. So I know some people are keen on just having one kind of generic attachment folder, and you might not need this, but for some, you might want to keep track of your 2025 year end in its own attachment folder. So what I've done in this example, you can see I have a year end 2025 files folder. And in order to create that, all you do is you hit create in the top right-hand corner. You'd give it a name. You'd hit save and you're good to go. That's really all you need to do. And then at that point, whenever you put a new attachment in the system, whether it's directly through the company module, a journal entry, an AP bill, right, you'll always be able to choose which folder this is for. So if you have any 1099 documentation, you can do this. And you can see here that year-end 2025 will be available as a folder for us moving forward. All right, and that is everything that I have for the purpose of this webinar here. So Courtney, do we want to open it up to questions, or did you have anything that you needed to get into here? Oh, here you go. This is a good reminder. So this is the list of the resources that we are going to include for everyone. You can see just filing 1099s, how to purchase forms, tax bandits info, right? So these are all quick links into Sage Intacct that will either bring you to the the video, the release notes, the how-to on the budgeting, right? So a lot of these should hopefully come in handy for you if you have any questions on those.
Thank you, Mike. And I did say I was going to drop those in the chat, but it is not cooperating with me with those many links. So we will include all the links in tomorrow's follow-up email with the webinar recording, along with in our year-end blog for Sage Intacct. So keep an eye out for those. They'll be headed your way tomorrow afternoon if you'd like access to any of these links. And then, like Mike said, it is now, we do have some time available for Q&A if you have any questions. I know we went over a lot today, and I think, there may not be any. So far we haven't seen any, so we'll give it just a few moments if you have a question for the Q&A. And then if not, if something comes to mind afterwards, we always encourage you to reach out to your customer account manager, or you can always reach us at info@swktech.com, which will be on the next screen. And we'd be happy to help you out with whatever year-end questions you do have. Mike, I think you might have just done too good of a job. I think you might have covered everything and we won't have any questions.
No, there's a lot of content in there. Hopefully not too overwhelming, but there's a lot of things to make sure we're shoring up at the end of each year. And, just keep in mind, there's plenty of things that you can do throughout the year to make the year-end close a little bit easier as you go.
Yes, that's a great point. So I think with that, we're going to wrap a nice 45-minute session. So you can always find additional resources, information, learnings about Sage Intacct on our website, swktech.com, under the resources tab. Like I said, we're also going to be sending this recording out to you tomorrow and sending you other year-end resources throughout the rest of the year. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much, Mike, for presenting us all this information today. We really appreciate it. And we hope all of you out there in the audience have a great rest of your day, a great Thursday, and a great holiday season.
Have a good one.
Thank you all.